Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, yWhales, wherever in the world you are today. So today, as we record this, it is September 12th. And the most important part of the news is that Terra Luna, which has tanked itself 17 times over, but over the weekend somehow was up like 300% for 2 or 3 days straight, is now crashing back down to, it's down at $4, whatever that means. And the reason I'm talking about, Terra Luna, Classic or whatever in the world they're calling it now, it is not because anybody cares about it, but it's just that's the cryptocurrency market is in that much chaos. There is no leading driver. It's not Bitcoin. It's not Ethereum. There is nothing that's kind of leading the direction, leading the pack, and causing a bunch of retailers, retail buyers, such as normal people, not institutions, to say, you know what, this is a great time to get into crypto. I believe it is a great time to get into crypto, and we're going to talk to Gene about that here in a second with EasyCrypto. But more so the philosophy of Bitcoin's not really, a hot commodity right now. It's still hovering in the 20-ish thousand stablecoin range as it's been doing for the last few months. Ethereum is, I want to say, literally 2 days away from the merge right now. And it's one of those things, do you buy on the rumor and sell in the news? Because right now it's kind of fluctuating. It's hit about a $2,000 cap and dropping back down. And the reality is that technically I think the merge is going to be fine. The chaos after of ETH POW, ETH Classic, ETH everything, of the kind of divulgence of all these new protocols that are kind of splintering off of ETH, I think are causing some chaos in the market. And we hear every single day on yWhales people confused about which is the normal ETH and what should they be doing and how do they connect their wallet. So I think that's a PR thing from a decentralized standpoint. But let's take a pause and let's jump back over to the reason why we're here. And Janine, thank you so much for coming by. You're a fabulous yWhale member, and we really appreciate all the times you stop by. But let's kind of take a few steps back and how did you get here today from a kind of an entire strategic plan of why would you even want to run your own exchange? I mean, playing on them is hard enough.
Well, I can't say it was entirely intentional and a very fully thought out plan. It just sort of happened, but I can take you through a bit of that journey, Jay, and sort of tell you how I got here and how EasyCrypto started.
Please. Yeah, let's start way before EasyCrypto.
We should start with how I got into cryptocurrency.
Go for it. I love that.
So it was, I think 2014, and I was, just fossicking around on the internet, reading things on forums as you do, and came across this Bitcoin concept. So obviously I was a little bit late to the party. I, missed the first few years of Bitcoin, but found out about it in 2014. And it just made so much sense, right? Where I was, looking at what we have the internet gives us this global village, a global communication system, anywhere in the world can communicate instantly, but we did not have that for payments. Payments are slow, expensive, not open to everyone. And so it made so much sense to have a global payment system that could sit alongside the global communication system we had with the internet. So I was like, oh, this is cool. Well, I should learn how this works. So I bought a couple of Bitcoin, not enough to make me a millionaire, sadly, but just enough to learn how it works, learn how wallets work. I think at that stage you had to download the entire blockchain onto your Electrum wallet to be able to sync the network to get your Bitcoin. It was a bit more complicated. And I just sort of was like, this is awesome. This is going to be the next big thing. And then 2015, 2016, years went by and nothing happened. And then 2017 happened with the big hype cycle that we had there, and we had all these other altcoins springing up. We had sort of, what I'd say, the first NFTs with CryptoKitties making big waves. Remember those days?
Oh yeah, and, no. It was if it had the word crypto in it, it was going to the moon. Like it was just absolutely anything you could think of.
Might still be going to the moon. Just give it a bit more time, maybe. But anyway, at that stage, I was working at Westpac, which is one of the largest banks in Australia and New Zealand, and people at Westpac knew that I had cryptocurrency, so I sort of had to become this overnight expert in everything to do with Bitcoin, blockchain, crypto, because I was fielding all these questions about it. And I'm a very firm believer in the ability to become a subject matter expert in anything. If the subject is small enough and you have a little bit of time, you can be an expert in anything. So I became the local cryptocurrency expert at Westpac, and I ended up sort of talking to lots of people, giving a lot of presentations. People were really interested, and these presentations always finished with, how do I get involved? How do I get some Bitcoin? How do I get some cryptocurrency? And at that stage, it was very difficult in New Zealand. There weren't many local providers. The ones that were here in New Zealand were very expensive. We were paying rates of up to 15% above market rate, which for a fully digital product with no shipping costs seems, very, that's just not on.
Seems very Australian.
And then Exactly. Where it's like small countries, far end of the world, you get price gouged for everything. And then, using international exchanges was really complex, time consuming, international money remittances, etc. So my brother and I set out to solve that problem and to make a way that was really easy, simple for people to access cryptocurrencies, and most importantly, to really be fair on pricing and make that accessible for everyone.
Love that. So, listen, the fact that you at least held on to your first Bitcoin is significant in and of itself. I bought 100 of them for $20 early 2010, and then threw them all away because, where you at least kind of had like, hey, there was some, philosophy behind this. Back when I was into it, it was so early as a test. Like they even label it. This is just a test of what a digital currency could look like. And so, it really resonates when you say like, all these years continue going by and they keep, you keep hearing the people saying mainstream's right there. It's literally just keep going, just hold a little longer and mainstream's coming. And the amount of years that I've been around here and the amount of years that I talk to people like yourselves that have been, very, very early, 2014 is very early. You are an OG. When you get that status, but what's needed to have, retailers is very different than what's needed to have institutions. Yeah. And, when we're talking about a we made it up to $3 trillion market cap, and it's huge. $3 trillion is nothing to sneeze at. But there's some banks that are larger than that. So we're literally, we're kind of just dipping our toe into the world's financial system at this point and waiting for acceptance from the big players.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, that thing of like, mainstream's just around the corner. I think, people have been saying that for a long time. I did used to believe that back in 2014. I was like, oh, it's so obvious, everyone will adopt this thing. But back then it was so complex. And to be honest, as an industry, we haven't really solved the complexity issue. Complexity around, the trade-offs between security and simplicity, that is something that really is still a challenge for the industry. And I think that in the future, this is probably going out on a limb and it might not be a popular view, but I'm not sure that cryptocurrencies will be what drives the mainstream adoption of this. I firmly believe that assets, digital assets will go digital in the future, finance will go digital. But I think for mainstream adoption, this draw card, which I expect you, definitely myself, a lot of us that are early adopters really believe in that draw card of owning your own funds and being in full control of your assets. I don't know how much of a draw card that is for the mainstream. And I think what mainstream need to drive this adoption is so much more the simplicity and the security. And that often comes with centralization. Yeah. So I think as we see more central bank digital currencies come out, which they will do, we'll see more central digitization of things like stock exchanges and other types of traditional assets moving digital, but in a way that's centralized. And I think, back to your point of the PR exercise for Ethereum, it's a really big PR exercise for the crypto community of how do we convince people of the value and necessity of holding your own assets alongside the utility and the safety and backup of having a call center that you can ring if, something goes wrong and you lose your password. So it's like those two things need to be able to coexist and people need to be comfortable to use both for different situations. And that's a big challenge, I think, to get that understanding across.
Yeah, I use an example a lot, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this. I say a lot that Web3 is in its Napster phase. It's proving that people have an interest in digital, ownership, digital assets, digital currency. It's proving that this is like, hey, it's a thing, it can work. But we're ignoring all the protocols that have been put in place for decades and decades and decades to provide consumers protection, to provide anti-theft, terror. There's all these things. In Web3 we hate to hear the word regulation, but not all regulation is bad. Some of it is actually put there for consumers protection. So I a lot of it say like it's a great project right now, but the actual legality and the ability for this thing to scale is still, I agree with you. It's going to take some really big players to step up and provide something that is dynamically easier to use than a traditional bank account. That's not where we're at today. And as well as those safety protocols for when something does bad happen, that they can get their assets back. That there's not just like, oh, you're out of luck.
And I think that piece on regulation is a really interesting and really important one. And, we're seeing this increasing tension between the industry and regulators. And I think this is something I monitor very closely. Like EasyCrypto operates in a number of jurisdictions around the world. And so we're on the ground having to comply with local regulations in multiple different countries. So it's something that I sort of have this good view across what's happening in different countries and who is regulated and who's doing it well. And I see, some countries are putting out, Indonesia just announced this morning the crypto exchange, or bourse as it's called, which is they're kind of taking traditional market infrastructure, so like a clearinghouse for a stock exchange, and trying to impose that on crypto. And it doesn't really work. Like, that's not how cryptocurrency works, that you need to have a locally domiciled central clearinghouse for crypto settlements. They've also got some interesting regulation around, specifically which cryptocurrencies can be bought and sold in Indonesia. I think there's a list of around 200 that are legal. Everything else is not. And so that's one extreme of regulators being very, very specific and sort of very detailed on what can and can't be done, as opposed to other jurisdictions like in New Zealand. The regulators take what's more of a principles-based approach than a prescriptive approach. And they say things like, hey, if it looks like a debt security, i.e. it has these types of attributes, then it should be treated in this way. Or if it looks like this type of thing, do that, rather than being very specific and putting in place, really detailed regulation that makes it impossible for innovation, to be honest. So having those broad-based principles approaches to regulation that protects end consumers, which is ultimately what we should all be caring about, whilst at the same time not stifling innovation. I think that's a really important path to navigate for regulators.
And I'm going to bet that, Janine, you got into this because you just loved the concept of digital money. You love the concept of digital ownership and everything else online, and how you could further humanity overall and bring banking to the unbanked and all these things. Did you think that you're going to get into this to be, a lawyer? Per se, and have to read through all these regulations and track all these bills and all the chaos from around the world? Because while you're in Australia and some other markets, there's no like global, Web3 kind of voice of reason, like, hey, here's how this technology works. You have in the United States and Canada and Mexico within, entirely varying, thoughts on the three, from the three. Mm.
It's interesting that you should say that, Jay, because I'll tell you a little bit of a slightly deeper dig into the EasyCrypto origin story, which was the real story of how EasyCrypto started. So what I told you before was all true, except how it actually came about was my brother was fielding all of these requests to buy and sell cryptocurrency for his friends, also for myself, because I'm kind of lazy. And I was like, I know how to buy crypto myself on exchanges, and I just can't be bothered. So I was like, Alan, can you buy me this? Can you buy me that? His friends were doing the same. Our family were doing the same. And he was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. So, he's a lazy man at heart as well. So he decided to automate the process of buying cryptocurrency for his friends and family. So he built this automated tool for trading cryptocurrency, then built a sort of a nice little website over the top of it, put it live on the internet. Strangers were giving him money to buy crypto for them. And then he called me up and he's like, oh, hey, is there any reason why I shouldn't be doing this? And I was like, oh, dear God, can you take that offline right now? And so that was December 2017. And I spent the Christmas holidays over December and January 2017, 2018, reading about 160 different pages of AML and financial market regulations to understand what we needed to comply with. Because at that stage, there was no guidance out there. There was no one saying, oh, if you're running a crypto business, you need to do X, Y, Z. It was a really complicated space to set up in. And I am not a lawyer. But again, you can become an overnight expert in anything if the subject matter is small enough, right? And so I am now an expert in AML regulation as it pertains to cryptocurrency businesses in New Zealand. So.
And that's a very similar story I hear from a lot of entrepreneurs, and even just today, like, we hear about it all the time. And, when yWhales, when we went out, said, hey, we want to be a legal DAO. We want to have a legal DAO that has global global reach. We're willing to follow all the laws. We're willing to do all these things. The number, I think I met with over a dozen securities lawyers, and I would say that out of that dozen, 11 of them said, no, you can do this. It shouldn't touch all these things. You should absolutely do it. And by the way, we would love to represent you and fight this battle in court. I'm like, no, you don't get it. I don't want to go fight in court. I want to not go to court. How do I comply? Which is what we're doing today. We're just going to comply as a security for our DAO and go kind of above and beyond that perspective. And so I agree and applaud with you with how you did it. We go, look, you could just continue doing what you're doing and run the gamut. And there's plenty that still today run that gamut. But if you actually want to have a viable business in Web3, if you actually want to have an institution of your own that can grow over time, like what you guys have done and like what, we at yWhales hope to do, you got to have a legal foundation first and foremost. Because if you launch on shaky grounds, then it's really hard to ever escape that perspective.
Yeah. And it's really challenging in multi-jurisdictions, right? I mean, for us, we're looking jurisdiction by jurisdiction and talking with regulators there. Yesterday, I met with the Malaysian Securities Commission, who were trying to wrap their head around our business model because they've passed regulation that allows an exchange and we're a broker. And they're just like, so how does it work and how do we, and just like, regulators are trying, which is great. They want to try to enable these innovations. But for someone like yourself, so you can set up your DAO, you can register it as a, legally in a particular jurisdiction, but then what controls do you need to put in place for who can engage? Because you want your DAO to be open to everyone in the world, right? But you don't want to have to get that DAO regulated and endorsed by 190 different sovereign states. So how do you navigate that complexity?
Yeah. Oh, listen, and we're every day we learn a little bit more. But let's go ahead and jump right into EasyCrypto because we've kind of talked all the way around it, and we've actually talked a lot about what you're doing today. But let's hear the kind of the elevator pitch of what you built and why. I think we've heard now I love the real version. But kind of how you manage your client base today is really what I'm interested in.
Yeah, so what we built is we wanted to build sort of like the easiest way for people to get into and out of cryptocurrency. So we started there as a fiat on and off ramp, a really simple way to buy crypto, sort of like, and when we started, all of the cryptocurrency offerings were exchanges. So there was that sort of 3-step model of pre-fund your account, trade, learn how an exchange and an order book works, which is very, can be very complex and maybe isn't something people have dealt with before. And then your funds are at risk on the exchange until you withdraw them. Whereas we're like, we just want to make this easy. And for us, the easier model is more like an online store. So like a retail shop, right? You go to the shop, you say what product you want, you click buy, you pay for it, the product's shipped to you, nice and easy. So we've sort of always had this model of how do we make cryptocurrency for humans? So crypto for humans is our motto at EasyCrypto. And so we're always trying to think of the lens of, instead of how to bring people into the world of crypto, how do we make crypto easy and accessible and like fit the pre-existing understanding and mental models that people have that they're already engaging with. So we started solving this problem in New Zealand, and we became the largest player in New Zealand quite quickly. And then we sort of thought, and to your point before, we looked at what we built, and this was really a cryptocurrency, on and off ramp business that could be lifted and shifted anywhere in the world. And we really wanted to be able to take this to countries, particularly more of the emerging markets and more of a Southern Hemisphere focus, where we saw that there was immense opportunity for people from crypto assets and, the financial betterment and equality of opportunity that could bring, and where a lot of those countries really weren't being well served by the existing crypto players at the time. So that's really been our focus is, how do we take this where it's needed, and how do we build it in a way that is really friendly and easy for people to understand and engage with.
Yeah. And I absolutely love that perspective and I think you have it right there in your name, easy. Because generally I don't care what anyone says, there is no such thing easy about crypto. It's very hard. It's very complex. There's, a variety of ways to do it. I think the only one that actually makes it easy, from an easy perspective, but then you lose all value and all ownership is, kind of Robinhood. You're just buying almost on paper the fact that you may own this. There's no audit to say that you do. You can't transfer it out. They say you may at some point, but you really can't. So the idea and concept of what you guys have built is absolutely fascinating, that you're just helping people say, I want to acquire these coins. I've acquired them. Now I want to sell them. You're not getting into anything complex. You're not doing anything, which is what most people, don't do. Nobody, the amount of wallets on the Ethereum blockchain today, that actually have one or more ETH is less than 1.5 million. That's a fraction of a number. And if you actually take that up to 0.1 ETH, I refer to these numbers all the time, 0.1 ETH, it's only about 6 million wallets. And when you take into kind of account that any active user of the Ethereum blockchain has most likely more than one wallet, it's a very small number of people that are actively using the chains versus just purchasing and holding the tokens or the coins. And so I really, again, thinking about what you guys have done and why you've done it, you are giving quite a bit of exposure. And I'm sure that you've got a roadmap in there as well to kind of help people understand, what they bought and why, as well.
Yeah, and education is a really core part of it. Like for us, the sort of three pillars that we have as a company is ease, ethics, and education. And so, obviously easy, it's in the name. It's, that is our founding principle, is making it easy for people to get involved. We also want to be the most ethical player in crypto, and that's something that's just really non-negotiable for us. And, like we've talked about quite a bit, understanding regulation compliant as part of that is also doing right by our customers and ensuring that we're really transparent, that we're not, I've learned so much since starting a business, things like dark patterns and websites. I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't know this stuff before, but you see the things that's out there and it's like, we really, we steer clear of all that kind of stuff. And we really just want to be a really good, transparent and ethical operator. And then lastly, education, like that is so important in this space. And it's a really interesting one. We have quite a lot of tensions internally between our very maxi staff and our sort of quite, newer to crypto staff. And what we want to offer to people is the ability to go as far down that rabbit hole as they want with good support, education, unbiased guidance the whole way. Or if they just want to stay at the top and kind of just, peer into the rabbit hole and not get involved in it, that's fine too. And like however deep you want to go in that journey, we want to be giving the education and support that lets people make good decisions and, good financial choices.
No, I love that. And you guys are in a few continents, and, I'd love to know, like, kind of, because you're New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and Brazil.
Yeah.
What's similar to all those, because they're not quite all in the same neighborhood?
No, they're not. New Zealand and Australia, we're very close cousins, and that was an obvious leap. South Africa, and New Zealand, Australia actually have quite a nice little trifecta of we're all ex-British colonies. Okay. We have there's a lot of migration between those, similar language and in some respects similar cultures. But really our mission, like once we launched New Zealand and then Australia, we were really very passionate on expanding out into the Southern Hemisphere, focus on Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia. So we're looking at, from our hub in South Africa, we'll be looking to expand further into Africa next year. We've also been sort of working to get licenses in a number of countries across Southeast Asia. And so that's something on the future roadmap as well. Again, that tension between, how can we expand and help most people we can whilst also navigating all the complexities of regulation. And we're looking at potentially some options around, can we expand our service using the tools we have into more countries without having to take this very slow country by country approach to the regulatory environments. And so that's something that we're sort of looking into at the moment as well. But yeah, we really are passionate about sort of the bottom half of the world where we come from. And there's a lot of people down here and a lot of opportunity and a lot of, I think, places where traditional financial systems have left people behind. And there, I really do see cryptocurrency as a great equalizer in that. I mean, the fact that with DeFi, right, you can lend as little, if you've only got $1, you can lend that dollar, you can start making interest on it immediately. You can withdraw that dollar straight away with no, penalties or anything like that. Like that is amazing. Whereas previously, particularly with wealth tools, if you didn't already have wealth, you were locked out of wealth creation tools. And so the opportunity for this equalizing is, so important. And that's what really drives me.
Well, let's kind of continue down the path and talk a little bit about DeFi. I think that's, DeFi, decentralized finance, is really only a few years old. The protocols, the big ones are, I would say still infants at their best. No matter how many billions of dollars they've moved through them, it's a fraction per day of, what.
But even that, like billions is tiny, right? Like you were saying before, 3 trillion in crypto was still nothing. Yeah. So it's like, we've got such a long way to go still.
Yeah, we're so exciting. Early, and there's so much going on and there's so many problems. But when you think about DeFi and kind of that idea of banking the unbanked, and let's be clear, I think that cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology is going to come to second and third world countries before it really comes to first world countries. And it's going to be so ingrained that by the time the first world countries kind of adopt it, the maturity level of these protocols will relatively be sorted out. And we're seeing a lot of that with like the Lightning Network and places around the world. But to circle around, with DeFi, what's the thing that has you kind of most excited about the prospects of the future of where that's going to go?
To be honest, the thing that excites me the most is what we don't know, which is, you would have seen it before. The parallels between the internet and cryptocurrency are pretty old. And there's this great video, I'm not sure if you've seen it, of Bill Gates talking to David Letterman in, I think it was like the late 90s. Yeah, you know that one? And he just cannot articulate what the internet's going to be able to do for us. Like everything he says, Letterman's just like, well, you know,
I've
he's
got
like,
a
oh, you
radio.
can
I've
listen
got
to a
a
baseball
newspaper.
game. Well, we've got radio. You can read a story. Well, we've got magazines. So it's like, I do feel like we're in that stage where I'm like, okay, programmable, peer-to-peer, 24/7, micro, money. Like, this is what cryptocurrency is giving us. And, DeFi is an extension of that. What can we do with that? I'm like, we don't even know yet. And that's what really excites me, is how this stuff is evolving and emerging. But, I genuinely believe that we will see all traditional, financial markets and traditional financial products, there will be digital equivalents of them. They'll probably eventually be replaced and, fully digitized. But it's the new stuff, like the stuff that we never thought of doing with the old paradigm because we couldn't. That's the stuff that I think will be, really amazing. And I don't even know what that looks like, but I'm like on the edge of my seat going, what's been built, what's coming out. And I love, following people like you who are in, the rest of the yWhales community, where it's like you can find out, where are people engaging, where's attention going, what's been innovated in. And ultimately for me, the big question mark is, what can I bring and offer to my customers and make their lives better with this? So.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. And for everyone kind of listening, to give, some color to what Janine's saying is, think about the initial ICO boom, initial coin offering. People were so excited that you could make a coin, you could make a protocol that just buying them for whatever reason there was. And we've seen that happen again with NFTs. Just the fact you could put an NFT on chain, people will go, oh my God, you're right. It's worth $10,000 for that randomly generated JPEG because there's only 10,000 others. And it's just, the concepts were so early that we have people, truly fighting over, in a lot of cases, an actual JPEG. Like there was not anything else behind there. There are a lot that do have some amazing technology behind them. And there are a lot of communities that did some things. But I'd say a lot of the garbage that we used to see was somebody literally saying, well, no, it's just going to have value because it's going to have value and it's backed by hopes and dreams. That's generally not a good business model. I don't approve of that. Hopes and dreams are fabulous for if you want to get a pony for your birthday party. But if you want to have a business thesis, you should have revenue, you should have KPIs and all sorts of, maybe a client base as well. So I agree with you from a perspective that the smart contracts that we're going to see, over the next 10 years are going to be 1,000 times more complicated, 1,000 times more in depth, and also a lot safer to use. They're going to encompass entire businesses will be run off of smart contracts. I believe that legal contracts, meaning the fact that you've entered into a legally binding deal to buy or sell something, as well as, you're being sued, and this is how your divorce will be a smart contract. So all those types of things have the ability to get there, but we're so early that people are still understanding, how should we build the protocol? What should even be in this protocol?
And I think also the issue that we have been quite early, like when you talk about smart contracts in the future will be, infinitely more complex. I'm like, yes, but that's also quite scary because the complexity brings, challenge for how secure are these things, how battle tested are they? And that's the stage that we're still in at the moment, right? Where it is quite, it's a little bit concerning to use smart contracts because there haven't been, there's not that many of them, or DeFi protocols that have really been battle tested around how do they act when they get to the extremes? How secure are the contracts? How long have they been out there in an open source environment where people can try to attack them? And how much can you trust those?
And let's be completely clear. Most of these are not secure. Most of this code has not been audited. And if it has been audited, it's been audited by internal teams, not external teams. So I think that there's, from a regulation standpoint, Janine, you run something that looks, sounds, and smells very similar to a bank. I'm sure you guys are constantly, have auditors that are in around you guys. And I absolutely believe that if you are, a DeFi protocol, you're a bridge, you're kind of anything else, you should be audited, automatically by third-party protocols to let you know where you are. Trailbits is fabulous. Zokyo is another one. There's multiple really good, auditors in the space for Web3 contracts. I don't know where Zokyo is today on their backlog, but I know Trailbits is out over a year. And that's a problem with just how young.
It's a good business to get into if you have the skills, because the demand is only going to increase massively.
It's only going to increase
massively. It would be lovely to see that kind of like really simple transparency for the end user, right? Like, at the moment you have audits of, if you're buying bonds, you've got audits of this is an A+, this is a triple B, like that kind of just simple, easy to understand for the end user visibility on how much can I trust this thing? How much risk am I taking? Because I'm a firm believer in free market economics, and people should be allowed to enter into risky transactions or to enter into transactions that like venture capital, for example, right? Like, you're allowed to go out on a punt and invest, but in opening those things up to retail customers isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, we've probably been too conservative in our financial markets approach, where retail customers is like, oh no, you can only do these things over here because we can't trust you to do this stuff. Maybe we can give people a bit more agency and autonomy with what they do with their money, but as long as it comes with that transparency and that education of, to enable them to make good decisions.
Yeah. And I'm unfortunately going to go back to a point you said earlier. And I say, unfortunately, because there's just a large portion of the people in crypto and Web3 right now are against regulations and kind of centralization. And I argue that without some form of central agency, and by central agency, it doesn't mean that they have to be sitting in an office together. You can be a decentralized team. But unless you have a team of people that know each other, they have a clear mission, vision, values, and they have clear roles and responsibilities, you're dealing with chaos. And that's what we've seen today. And so I do believe that you need to have somebody show up, and it can be run by a DAO. It can have transparency as far as what they're doing and how they're doing. I don't agree with, the Fed or anything else. So I think that there should be a transparent, centralized agency that's really kind of putting their thought processes and procedures at the consumer's behest and a little bit less at the protocol behest.
Yeah, and obviously I run a centralized business for decentralized assets, which is a little bit of an oxymoron potentially, but I do think there is space for centralized and decentralized. I don't think they both have their pros and cons, and I am very, very much a fan of decentralized. Like, personally, I'm all about it. I hold all my crypto myself. I don't use centralized services, but at the same time, for a lot of people, they add a lot of value. And I think we should be happy to have both, and also happy to have regulation appropriately in a way that protects customers whilst also enabling innovation. I think that's the key thing, really. Like, crypto's had a bad rap for being the Wild West, right? And it was the Wild West because there was so much bad actors going on because there wasn't regulation. It's like, I think as an industry, we probably want to move beyond that. We probably want to be more, legitimized, more a safer environment for people to come and engage with, and a safer environment to run businesses. And, that does require some regulation. These things don't have to be polar opposites. We can have decentralization and a bit of regulation and innovation and, all of this stuff kind of working in a balance.
So, Janine, I'm going to ask you this question because there's been a number of these groups that have popped up, and generally what it is, and I'm oversimplifying, it's half of the group will be some insanely wealthy crypto OGs that have done insanely well for themselves. They're incredibly wealthy at this point. Their protocol is either still alive or dead, but it doesn't matter because they've got the cash in the bank. And then you combine that with the other half is just a bunch of TradFi people that are saying, hey, we understand the way things are today. And what I find is you have an entire group of now people that have no motivation whatsoever to move the protocol forward. It's a lot of very self-serving conversations. The regulation ends up being very centralized. And so my question to you is what does a group that could properly represent the blockchain world to the world, what would that even be made up of? What would it look like? Would it be a DAO? Would it be a traditional company? What do you think?
It's a very interesting one. I think you definitely need people who are at the coalface and at the front line actually seeing the impacts of, if we're talking about, advocating for what regulation should look like, you cannot do that without the actual, impacted industry, the frontline people. So those who are running decentralized protocols, those who are running centralized protocols as well, because this will affect them in different ways. And I think, to be honest, you need the regulators as well to be involved to make these conversations work, because if regulators are buying into and I talk to a lot of regulators. It's just kind of part and parcel of what I do. And for the most part, I think it is really important to get FaceTime for the regulators, because they sort of have this perception that crypto is a sketchy, crazy place. So you sit down in front of them and you're a real person that's running a legitimate business that wants to be a good corporate citizen, and suddenly makes it less scary, and they can see that, there's value in working together. Yeah, I don't know if that totally answers the question because it's not one I've really given a lot of,
No. This is what I like to do. I like to surprise the guests with random high level thinking conversations, and there's no right answer to it. I mean, and that's the problem is there's no definitive. Here's how we fix this communication problem. Here's how we fix the FUD problem. Here's how we fix the regulation issue, because we're so early and the space is evolving so much that someone who made even $1 billion 3 years ago, like if they're not still current in the space, they have no idea what's going on today. Like that's congratulations, you did great and you exited, but the players today are entirely different than
and
the
problems they're facing are entirely different. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, literally, now we've got this massive thing of proof of work versus proof of stake. There's people arguing on both sides of which is better for the environment, and you got people that are some very passionate ones, of which I do believe them, that proof of work actually does facilitate the largest investment in alternative energy of any other asset class on the planet. And by eliminating, Bitcoin and Ethereum proof of work, or at least Ethereum proof of work, and now they're challenging Bitcoin's proof of work, you're actually giving up, probably some of the largest investors in solar and alternative energy on the planet, because miners need it to be free. They need it to be cost effective. And forget the people doing it at home. Don't know anyone that does that. The professionals, the big publicly traded companies, I mean, that is top of their mind, and they are absolutely on the efficiency meters every single day.
And that's the thing, right? Is like you get all of this bad media publicity and attention around the energy usage as this big headline number, with completely missing the point of that transparency. And the transparency is phenomenal because it can drive user choice, it can drive consumer behavior, but also it drives innovation in the those actually using the energy and sort of running the businesses that are consuming this. And that innovation is phenomenal. Like you say, like a lot of the big advances in renewables have come out of that space. So yeah, it's a tough one when we're up against headlines. And again, like we talked about before, so much comes back to PR. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges of crypto as a whole, is like we don't have this big PR community because we're just this decentralized group of people doing cool stuff and really believing in what we do. But PR actually makes a really big impact. So
what's the kind of the top thing that you have to educate people on? Education is such a big deal, and I'm sure that you deal with your own misconceptions every single day in your perspective. But what's kind of that number one, like if you could just solve one problem and never have to answer this question again, what would it be?
The thing that I would most love to solve is protecting people from scams. Like this is something, because we deal with retail customers, we're at this sort of the very front lines of what it looks like for people to be caught in scams. And there's so many crypto scams out there. It's such a fertile ground for people, I guess, because it's this area where people think you can get rich quick, but they also know very little about how it actually works. Put those two things together and it's a scammer's, dream. And so I think giving people the tools to think critically about a project, like, for those of us who are in the crypto space, we've sort of probably used to some of these things around, look at a white paper, look at the team, look at what's really happening under the hood, look at the tokenomics, like, that kind of level of due diligence, that's great. We'll still get caught out in scams every now and then, but, hopefully we've got a bit of savviness around that. But for people completely new to cryptocurrency, it is just this massively complicated space, and the ability to sift through what is legitimate and what isn't is really complex. And so being able to give people, and like back what we talked about before, this is an area that maybe a little bit more regulation could help in, with a bit of that audited history of, is this a project that is, legitimate? Does it have any sort of third party endorsing it? And what does that look like? And just giving people a bit of those tools to make good decisions without having to spend hours doing the research themselves. Because not everyone will do that, let's be honest.
And even, I will say this, even some of the most advanced users and traders that I know, people that I look up to and reach out to when I can't figure something out, and there's many times that it happens. You do enough DeFi, bouncing around protocol swaps, at some point you go, I have no idea where that money went. And then you got to go back and track it down. So that's not a scam. That's just the overall complexity of it. But I've seen some of these people that are insanely smart, insanely well-versed, been in the space for years, and come out and just raise their hand and go, hey guys, here's how I got scammed this week. And I just want you to all know why. And you hear about it. And sometimes it's incredibly complex. And other times it's just you've done that same transaction 100 times. Something may have looked a little different in retrospect now that you're thinking about it, but it's just too easy. It's just too easy for scammers right now. And that's not the way it should be. And the other side of this that I'll argue, you guys, you originally said, or not you guys, you originally said, hey, you looked at this as a way to make a change in the payment rails over Swift and some of these other ones. And no one ever said, hey, I'm paying Visa, like 1.5%. It'd be great if I could raise that to like 5 or 6% and make it more complicated. That would work out better. So we're far away from solving that problem too.
Yeah, and what you said before around the examples of people who are really, expert in the space getting scammed and saying this is how it happened. Like, I have such mad respect for people that go out there and put that story out, because it is so important to A, raise awareness, B, sort of remove the stigma around it, because, that helps us fight back against scammers by educating what tools they use, but also by just realizing that can happen to anyone, because that really helps. Like, I'm always on my toes, but at the same time, I'm like, yeah, it's probably going to happen to me someday. Something's going to go wrong. And like you say, you're just like, and this, going back to what we talked about earlier, this is why the industry is not yet ready for mainstream. Like, you can't have, and perhaps decentralization never will be able to go mainstream for reasons like this, is that a lot of people value security and safety of their money over sovereignty of holding their assets. And that's just a trade-off that unless we can actually solve for that, we're never going to see full decentralization. There will always be a space for centralized players because of that third-party safety and security, which comes with challenges such as, what if I can't get access to my funds because they're being held by a third party who won't release them? And as a third party who, people's funds go through us, and I try to protect my customers from scams, that's a really challenging balancing act of, how do I know if I should release these funds because this person's genuinely, the right recipient, or, what if they're in a scam? And that's a really hard, space to navigate, and something that if I could wave a magic wand and make scams go away, that would be, life mission done.
Yeah, listen, it's been going on since the first commercial trade, the beginning of time. But I'd like to,
it's been going on since the Garden of Eden, but it's it's just same old stuff, just different tools and different labels, right?
But I really like what you're saying here, and I think that it's worth kind of taking a second and unpacking. There's room for both centralized and decentralized in the same asset class. There is people that like yourself are probably totally fine with self-custody. Same as, you may go to your bank and say, I just want to hold cash under my mattress. I can put it in my safe. I feel just fine having my life savings, at home with myself. I don't trust you. I don't want to get into it. And that's entirely fine. That's your right. But a majority of people go, you know what? I don't mind paying the fee to the bank. Because if I ever have a problem, I can call them. I can walk in the door. They're there. They know me. They understand it. There's a process of which that I can lock and unlock my funds. And I would argue that that's probably what 90+% of the world wants. They do want someone that's their main job. That's their main focus. That's their main thought. The core concept of decentralized and, self-ownership, self-custody, there's nothing wrong with that. It happens today in the TradFi world as it is. It's just on a smaller and different scale. But I think that there's room for both.
Absolutely. And I think this is where I probably butt heads a little bit with maximalists. But, you've got this idealistic world, and I totally understand the idealism. And we've talked about, I personally like to hold my own crypto. I think that's awesome. I'm fully on board with the principles behind it. But the world doesn't align with ideals. The world aligns with reality, and reality is, like you say, 90% of people don't want that, and they probably never will care about it. And all the education in the world around, the great fundamentals and principles and, the whys behind this won't compete with just don't make me think. I mean, that's really the guiding principle of a lot of very successful development at the moment, is to make things for people they don't have to think, because there's a lot of cognitive load. There's a lot of work going on for people in their everyday lives. We don't have to make, finance hard for them as well. Just make it easy, and easy is typically not self-custody.
Yeah. And I would say that if the number of people actually understood how the world's banking system on the SWIFT protocol worked, they'd be horrified. The entire thing is built, quite simply to manage collecting taxes, and to make sure that at every step of the way, as you transfer domestically, internationally, or vice versa, that all the taxing entities can see exactly what you're doing, why you're doing it, and be able to audit, stop, or kind of get involved in those transactions. And so I think that there's a lot of reasons. In fact, there's more reasons to move into a blockchain world, that it's auditable, that you can see what's there. You can see, how your governments are spending their money. Like all of that should be transparent. So I completely believe in a transparent world. Decentralization, I think there's a rush to it. It's a beautiful concept. It's just going to be very hard to attain in the short to medium term. Long term, meaning like 10 plus years out, after we have the infrastructure built, everything's working, and you have multiple generations. You've got a couple billion people that have been onboarded into kind of Web3 blockchain technologies. That's where people will suddenly be like, you know what, I don't need anyone else to hold these custody of these things. The technology has evolved, the products have evolved, and remember, this is just Web 1 all over again. The core concept that, early on, the majority of people had to go to school, work, or, the library to use email. Like Cyber Monday, which still is a thing today, is called Cyber Monday because there were so many people that did not have a computer at home that they quite simply said, well, we have Black Friday, but everyone's off work for shopping. We need to wait till Monday when people are back in the office, and then they can use their work computer or school computer to shop online. Like that's still a thing.
Wow, that's awesome. One thing that I think is really important to touch on what you just said around the transparency is the flip side of that is privacy. And I think this is something that is another really big tension with regulation and centralization, and something that as an industry, I think we do need to care very, very deeply about and be very, very engaged with how the space is evolving, because the potential for, transparency on a blockchain is amazing, but privacy needs to be a fundamental of how these things are built. Even if you have nothing to hide, you should still very, very deeply care about privacy, particularly when it comes to your finances. And I think as the space evolves, it is, I think, inevitable that digital identity becomes linked in with wallets and linked in with blockchain transactions. And that just makes it even more important that we get on top of and out in front of how we manage privacy before that happens, and before we have sort of our whole lives all kind of neatly packaged into this digital space. And, what you said about the SWIFT network, imagine that on blockchain with your identity, your transactions, everything you do in your life in one very transparent and auditable place. So, very important call, I think, for all of us to get involved in
and I think that's a huge evolution, because it will never happen on Ethereum. It was never designed for it. It was never, it was always, everything's transparent. And I think that people, right now we're still playing a game on here. There's very few people that live their lives on chain. And the concept that your employer can see your bank accounts and see all your own. And if your employer is paying you, you go, oh my God, why am I going to give Jay any more money? Like, you see how much cash he's got in his bank account? Like that's a thing you never want to have. Vice versa, you buy a hot dog from the hot dog stand. You don't want that company to go, oh crap, we could absolutely upcharge this guy. Look at what's in here and look at everything else.
Or you get mugged by someone, watching your transaction at the hot dog stand.
And that's exactly it. Yeah. So, the one that I really like, and we get to talk to a bunch of, level 1, level 2, and level 0s, Manta Network, I think has a really interesting concept that they do. And Manta Network, it is, you have your public key, you have a private key, and then you have an auditor key. And I think that's a really interesting concept. And all it does is, every time you make a transaction on the Manta Network, and it's an ETH, it's very much ETH based. It's not ETH based. I'm sorry. It's like ETH from that transaction standpoint. But the idea and concept around what it is it just shows that Jay made a transaction. Doesn't say how much, doesn't say to where, doesn't say to who. And on your side, it would say that you had a receiving transaction. Here, it doesn't say how much. Like there's no kind of connection between the two. However, if you have a taxable regulatory or an auditor, then you can say, hey, you need to see how many of these transactions. Well, here you can see the month of this, and here's an auditor key good for 5 days. You can go ahead and see all the stuff there. So it gives that transparency when needed. But as far as you as a protocol level, you just see that you've done business. You don't know with who. It doesn't matter, and it's that those aren't your clients unless they tell you they're your clients. And so I kind of, you're starting to see the inklings of people going a little bit beyond kind of the open blockchain of it's all just public, because there is needs for privacy.
Absolutely. And I think protocols like that's an amazing way to solve for that. And I think we also, we'll see evolution in the solutions that sit on top as well. The Tornado Cash type mixing solutions. There are ways to solve for those that do not breach sanctions, or at least enable, have a free and open source platform. And probably don't want to go down the rabbit hole of, can you really sanction code, or should you? That's a whole other question. But there are ways to solve for this that enables people to prove that their transactions were legitimate without showing the source or origin of their funds, because that's really what you're looking for, right? Is to be able to obscure your source of funds whilst at the same time being able to authenticate, zero knowledge proof that, yes, you are acting legitimately, should that be needed to be proved to anyone.
Yeah. And with any new technology, there is a host of problems that come up that have long since been solved in the traditional world. Like if you have a bank account and somebody from the OFAC list tries to wire money into your account, like the banks are going to stop that. They're going to call you and go, hey, there's a very bad person trying to send you money. Is there a reason why? I have no idea who this person is. You go from there, but there's been a stopgap that prevented that from happening. We saw the dusting of Tornado Cash, and I thought it was entirely hilarious from a certain standpoint that you're just essentially doxing wallets with tiny amounts of ETH or USDC that are now blocked from an entire protocol. And so, like you said, we can go into that for an entire show in and of itself. We'd love to have you on for that. But this is that point.
It's a fascinating concept, though, right? Like, because you get all these airdrops. Like, I don't know if you look at your ETH wallets and see all like the random shit that's just come into them. But there was also that case recently of a court order that was served via airdrop to a wallet that had received stolen funds. And so, like, the idea of, will we be seeing protocols in the future that can refuse incoming transactions for that reason, to not get doxed or to not have dust attacks or other things? But also, what does that mean for to be able to accept or refuse airdrops would be fascinating, because they're also a massive tax issue as well, in terms of, do you have to pay tax on something that you were given against your will that you didn't want and you might not realize the value of? So much complexities in the space. And like you say, a lot of these things have been solved for in the traditional world, and then we just have this crazy new blockchain world that does it a bit differently, and we just need to work through how those things are managed.
I remember email before spam filters. It was not fun. And if you were on a spam list, there was no such thing as opt out or opt in. Like you're going to continue getting these emails, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. In fact, it used to be one of the big cases where people would actually have to go make a new email address because they quite simply couldn't get away from the spam that some of their original email addresses got hit into. So it's a lot. Again, it's an old problem of which you're probably too young to remember these days.
This will show my age, but my first workplace had a fax machine, and you got spam via fax. Like, people would just send your fax machine advertising that you didn't want or care about. And this is, I think, a great analogy of how much better digital systems are, right? Like, sure, the first email clients were completely inundated with spam, and we couldn't, there was like, get a new address, but we've solved for that. We've solved for it very well because digital tools enable us to, program around these types of things. And so similarly with blockchain, right, we'll be able to program around doxing attacks, around dusting attacks, around all those sorts of things, because there's always a solution, right? If you can think of it, you can program it, and there'll be solutions there, which is what makes the space so exciting and what makes it something that I just love to be involved in.
I love that. So Janine, absolutely fabulous conversation. I mean, really love just kind of getting into kind of your thought process. And this is you, in and around Web3, blockchain, and cryptocurrencies, of kind of what's needed to happen over the next couple decades. I mean, none of this is going to happen fast. And same as you, you're closing in on a decade in the industry at this point now, as you kind of come into it. And I'm sure you never thought in those first few years, you know what it's going to take? It's going to take 15 to 20 years for this asset class to mature. And that's really where it's looking to be. And so with that kind of thought in mind, that we are still early and that we are still young, how would you, without financial advice, how should people be thinking about cryptocurrencies today?
So I think where we're at today is probably, we're still in a relatively speculative phase. And so I'll sort of separate crypto into, you've got utility and use cases, which is probably what, many of us got involved for. What I'm really passionate about is what these things can actually do real world, how you can use them, how they can make your lives better. That's sort of more when we talk about the mainstreaming. I don't think we're there yet. I think we're still quite solidly in, most cryptocurrency transactions are around speculation. That's the reason why most people get involved and looking for a return on their investment. So for people wanting to get involved and that being their driver, which, I think that is really the primary driver at the moment, I'd say there's probably a couple of things that you can look at in terms of how you go about that. The first one is that key rule of finance of diversification. And of course, as you said, this is not financial advice. This is just generic discussion around the type of strategy that I employ myself. So firstly, diversification into cryptocurrencies and asset class. So, you wouldn't put 100% of your wealth into crypto, but also don't put 0% in. Find somewhere in the middle. And, a lot of studies have shown 5 to 10% is a good amount. I'm personally a lot closer towards the higher end of that 100% spectrum, but, your mileage will vary. But find a portion of your assets that you think is the right amount to put into crypto. and then diversify within cryptocurrency as well. So don't just chuck it all in one project, one protocol. Probably look at, maybe a couple of things at the top end of town, your Bitcoin, your Ethereum, your kind of higher, the ones that have been around for a while that have, really good reputation and really good mana. And then maybe a couple of like more fringe projects or things that you're personally interested in. Like say if you're into gaming, there's a whole lot of gaming tokens that might be interesting. Or if you're into art, look at NFTs, look at different things that perhaps appeal to you as an investor and diversify across those. And the last thing I'd say is that one of the really well employed and really sort of proven strategies is called dollar cost averaging, which instead of trying to buy in at the low of the market, you just sort of buy little bits that, maybe every week or every month you're buying consistently into the market. And that just gives you a nice sort of average across the ups and downs of the markets. It doesn't matter where crypto is on any particular day. You're just averaging out the ups and downs. And that's a really well proven strategy that, manages to leave the concerns about time in the market at the door. It's a lot less effort and stress, but it actually works out well in the long run. And I personally have just started doing dollar cost averaging myself. I've been more of a buyer and hodler, but this year in the last few months, I've sort of decided that the market's at a place where it's good for me to finally get into that drip feed auto buy strategy. So I am now a dollar cost average convert myself.
I love that. So just to help expand on this a little bit more, and I think it's helpful for people to kind of think about, okay, so there's an asset class called cryptocurrencies. Now there's about all these subcategories, and I'm sure that you guys at EasyCrypto kind of do your best to educate. But from my perspective, I like level zeros and level ones. I don't do level twos, and I specifically don't do level twos for a reason. I also don't do DeFi protocols for a reason, but I do invest in utility tokens or utility NFTs that do have perceived values around communities and everything else. Any thoughts around what I'm up to?
I would love to know why you don't invest in level threes, level twos. Like, what's your thesis there that's a blanket no?
The investments I'm making are over a 5 to 10 year period, and so while I do trade a little bit back and forth on and off of it, level one is there. I mean, they have it for a variety of reasons. Level twos have, whether you've ever heard this term or not, Sherlock. Apple Sherlocked a company years ago with a product called Einstein, meaning that they literally just quite simply said, you know what, that's a great thing that you're doing. And it was a third party company. And Apple just said, you know what? And then the next release of their OS just built that in and entirely just disconnected a product. And a lot of what level twos right now are doing is solving the issues that level ones have with scaling. Ethereum is saying they're not going to solve that scaling issue. That's what they're saying today. And people are building protocols around there. So there's nothing wrong. I think Polygon and a lot of these other ones are doing some amazing things. ZK rollups are fascinating technology that are going to continue to evolve. But are they going to be around in a decade? Are you going to need them once you kind of solve some of these scaling issues after you've gone through another few iterations of it? And again, in the short term, yes, you do need them. In the long term, that's just my personal philosophy, and it helps me narrow down that I'm only looking at those certain protocols, because you can only keep so many things in your mind. And I see a lot of really bad portfolios where there's just a smattering of no consistency.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different approach, right? Like, if you take the spray and pray approach, and I have to admit, I was a little bit guilty of that in 2017. This is why Alan decided to automatic. So I was just like, can I have a little bit of that, a little bit of that, and a little bit of that? I think I'm a more mature investor now. I sort of have a few things that I really stick to. So I dollar cost average into Bitcoin and ETH. And then I might, buy a chunk into a project. But like you, I take a long-term view. Like, I just don't have the time or energy to be actively trading. So I'll buy projects that I think have long-term potential. Maybe they win, maybe they don't. It's a bit like, venture capital investing, right? You sort of take a punt on a few things and hope that one pays for your whole portfolio. But with everything that I'm buying, and again, this is just my personal approach because of the time that I have to invest in my investments, it's very much a buy something and hold it for a couple of years. So I think, your thesis on those the different layers makes a lot of sense, and I think for people who are more active and can be more involved in, okay, is this particular problem that this coin is solving going to be solved by the base layer in the next little while, in which case this coin's not going to have value, or might even be consumed. Like, there's interesting ways that these things might eventuate that. Again, with crypto as a whole, I think there's a lot of optionality that we haven't yet seen in a lot of ways that the space might evolve. But it's good to have your own investment thesis and stick to it, because it does help you narrow it down. And it's a crazy world out there. There's like how many thousand tokens at the moment? I'm not even sure, but you need some way to filter through them. So.
There was probably 10 new ones created while we were on this podcast. So easily. Janine, fabulous conversation. Really, it's amazing every time you and I get to talk. I'm always just kind of blown away by your depth and outlook on kind of the overall industry. What's the best way for someone who's interested in EasyCrypto? They're in one of the countries of which is allowed to go ahead and find you guys and learn more. And if they have any other questions for you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so our website's easycrypto.com, nice and easy. Traditional spelling of all that for anyone that's not here to see the actual words behind me. And for me, I'm on Telegram and on Twitter, Janine_EC on Twitter, Janine C on Telegram, and I can't even remember what I am on Discord, but I am in the yWhales Discord. So if you're a member of that, hit me up there.
That's all that matters. yWhales, fabulous conversation today with Janine from EasyCrypto. I think it's always amazing when you get to talk to the people that are full-time in the business, been in the business for a long time, and actually helping to adopt and educate the masses into this asset class that we all know and love so much. So Janine, thank you so much for coming by. yWhalers, we will see you guys next time. Be good.